Have you ever fallen in love with a mermaid? Probably not, because you would already be dead. But this is the story of a guy who fell in love and survived. The main character is a young man named Gaspard, who's currently performing a live show. Or he may be your friend after the 5th shot of tequila. Whatever the case may be, guests are enchanted by his incredible voice. At the show's end, a half-drunk customer comes out of the bar singing a song. Suddenly, he hears a magical melody that attracts him. He is so captivated that he goes down the stairs and enters the water. I suppose the water is icy, but he's too lured by the entity in front of him to stop. I can't tell whether he drowned or fell asleep in the water. Gaspard works at this bar by the sea together with his father. Actually, the bar has been in the family for a few generations. Still, now it is not as profitable as it used to be. Gaspard's father reveals that the business is doing terribly, and they have to sell. But Gaspard is too emotionally attached to the place and doesn't like the idea of selling the bar. I say it every time. Emotions must stay out of business. At the night's end, his father told him to stop being a wimp and move on. Gaspard leaves the bar to go home. And he also hears that melodious voice. But strangely, he doesn't give a damn and goes home on his roller skates. Before entering the house, Gaspard is received by the crazy neighbor Rosie, who was watching him through the peephole. She tries every time to hit on him, while he tries to ignore her. Rosie encourages him to find a girlfriend since he's always alone. But the only creature waiting for him at home is his cat, Johnny Cash. Gaspard devotes most of his time to his mother's last memory, which is a book called Dreamers. He's obviously a guy living in the past who is noticeably depressed. His house is littered with heirlooms, trinkets, and toys. His heart is broken by too many reckless romances. Later that night, as Gaspard falls asleep next to Johnny Cash, a song by the Barbarettes plays. An old man near the bar on the seashore hears that magical tune again. Hereafter, he enters the water as if he had found the goldfish. The next morning, Gaspard was having breakfast together with his cat when two men rang his doorbell. They brought him the gramophone from the bar. Therefore, he realizes that his father is selling the place. In less than a minute, Gaspard grabbed his roller skates and sprinted toward the bar.
Votre vol se grave.
But why is this madman rushing into the middle of the street? He arrives at the bar and stresses to his father that his mother would fight for the place.
Enfous-moi le camp d'ici!
Gaspard came out of the bar and noticed a mermaid near the shore. At first, he thought the girl was wearing a costume. He took her in his arms and tried to stop a cab. No one is there to help him. Surely they thought they were drunk. Then Gaspard exchanges his shoes for a motor tricycle. Meanwhile, in front of the hospital, Dr. Victor and Dr. Merrilee flirt. Apparently, they're a happy couple, even though she is 10 years older. Melina enters the hospital because of an emergency, and in the process, Gaspard arrives in his junk at the hospital. He immediately runs inside the hospital for help. At the same time, Victor saw the siren and went to take a look. He checked her pulse, but the mermaid began to sing that melodious tune. After that, Victor made a facial expression as if he had assumed a particular substance. A few moments later, he began to feel ill, but her magic has no effect on Gaspard. In the hospital, Gaspard was looking for his medical insurance card and pulled out his mother's book. In short, the staff refuses to treat the mermaid because she has no insurance. And Gaspard rushes away, forgetting the book. Dr. Victor's health deteriorated. A little later, Gaspard arrives home with the siren on his shoulder. Of course, Rosie was peeking into the peephole. He brings her in the bathroom and puts her in a bathtub. The mermaid wakes up and starts singing her tune, but this has no effect on Gaspard. He then wanders off to the kitchen to prepare something to eat. That girl is hungry. She has literally ripped the head off a toy. Gaspard's father calls him to check why he didn't show up for work. He's too busy taking care of Mermaid.
Je peux pas venir ce soir, papa.
What bothers me is his reaction to a mermaid. He acts like he finds a new one every day. Shortly afterward, Gaspard returns to the mermaid and treats her tail wound. He tells her not to worry because he knows how to treat animals. You can tell that this means he has not spoken to a girl in years. He gives her first aid and suddenly she reveals that her name is Lula. He's stunned that she can speak. Dude.
Lula.
You just found a mermaid. Why doesn't that surprise you? Lula tells him that she will die if she doesn't return to the sea in 2 days. Gaspard promises that he will take her to the sea after it heals. After they meet, Gaspard makes her try fried fish. That same night at the hospital, Victor was dying, singing the siren's melody. In the middle of the night, Gaspard woke up because of a pain in his heart. He was probably falling in love with the mermaid, which caused the pain. He got out of bed and got some medicine while Lula was scared to death by the police sirens from outside. Victor's reports showed that there was a much increased amount of nitrogen and some marine gases in his body.
Et en fait, non, c'était comme s'il était...
The following day, Gaspard was taking a shower while Lula was sleeping underwater. Suddenly, she wakes up and is shocked that he is still alive. I don't think it's convenient for her to kill him now. How would she get back into the sea? For someone, the morning starts well, but for Melina, it is the exact opposite. She took the pregnancy test and burst into tears. Most likely she's pregnant. Surprisingly, from behind appears the ghost of Victor, who embraces her. Melina is enchanted, but soon after returns to reality. Lula reveals to Gaspard that men usually die when they hear her magic melody. He almost bursts out laughing and doesn't take her seriously.
Que leur cœur explose.
Come on now, Gaspard, do you remember what happened to you last night? Lula tells him that her melody breaks the hearts of those who fall in love with her. Gaspard had a lot of affairs with different women and got to a point where he couldn't love anymore. This probably caused his isolation from other women and led him to sleep with his cat. Nevertheless, Lula warns him that this time his heart will be forever broken. Once again, Gaspard doesn't listen to her and brings her a small TV in the bathroom. He plays a movie about a mermaid. That same day at the hospital, Melina was investigating the cause of Victor's death. Melina learns from the reception that a man left a strange book. After that, he fled to the hospital to retrieve his mother's book. Once out the door, Rosie was already waiting for him.
Bonjour, Monsieur Gaspard.
She hears his talk with Lula, but doesn't yet know she's a real mermaid. Back to the hospital, Melina found blue blood and scales on the road. She began to rub it with her fingers. Thought she would taste it. At the same instant, Gaspard arrived at the hospital in his motorized tricycle. Gaspard entered the hospital and asked about his book, but the staff asked him for insurance. Meanwhile, Lula is secretly living in his bathroom and watching a movie. Gaspard fails to retrieve his book from the hospital and goes to work. While walking in the bar, a maid sings the mermaid's melody. Gaspard asks her where she had heard it, but she doesn't know either. Apparently, this magic doesn't work on women. Later, Gaspard tells his friend that something incredible has happened to him.
C'est juste extraordinaire.
But he doesn't reveal that he has a mermaid in the bathtub at home. In addition, the protagonist complains to his father that he has lost his beloved book. His father's almost happy about this, saying it is a sign that he needs to move on. Gaspard needs to leave the past behind, but he's again offended. Meanwhile, at home, Lula's watching a movie and eating soap. Gaspard has not left her a single piece of bread. She is visibly entertained by the movie. In fact, she's having a great time. Just then, Rosie takes the key to Gaspard's house and goes inside. The strange woman meets Lula and mistakes her for Gaspard's girlfriend. Rosie thinks she's a singer, knowing that Gaspard is crazy about them. Rosie's very friendly and gets along with Lula right away. Rosie tells her the story of Gaspard and the legendary family bar. Gaspard's mother created the bar in the 1940s, and it was an instant success.
Chanteuse mystérieuse.
People who wanted to have fun and fall in love would meet in that bar. Even during the war, the bar remained a meeting place for art and poetry lovers in particular. In fact, they would gather to read poetry aloud. Unfortunately, Gaspard's mother died while he was still very young. Before her death, his mother left him the book for which Gaspard cared so much. Rosie returns to her apartment but forgets her cigarette. Lula, out of curiosity, tries to take a puff but spills the perfume on the floor and causes a fire. Gaspard received a phone call and learned that his apartment was catching fire. He speeds toward the house in his wreckage. Incredibly, it didn't break down while driving. The firemen arrived much earlier and put out the fire, but one of them was attracted by Lula's melody. The magic takes effect, and the fireman loses his mind to this melody. Gaspard arrives at the apartment, and the fireman advises him not to smoke in the house and shows him Rosie's cigarettes.
Faites attention quand vous éteignez vos cigarettes.
Gaspard goes to the bathroom, but doesn't find Lula in the tub. He finds her a little later under his bed. She is terrified, and Gaspard does not take it out on her, knowing that Rosie left the cigarettes in his bathroom. Since his bathroom is destroyed, Gaspard takes Lula into Rosie's toilet. She stays and talks with her while he returns to the apartment to sadly observe the burned memories of his mother. A few moments later, Gaspard returned to Lula, and they agreed to return her to her natural habitat. First, however, Gaspard grants her one last wish before leaving. Lula asks him to fish and to sing her a song. Gaspard promises to get some fish, but first, he sings her a little song. He was impressed by her enchanting voice and proposed to her to make a feat. So Gaspard took her to a music studio, and they recorded their first song. Gaspard gets a little flirty and tries to kiss her, but she pulls back. Don't jump the gun, Gaspard. Don't jump the gun. He is sure the song will be a hit. Be ready to pump it on all platforms.
Un carton?
Meanwhile, at the hospital, the fireman is about to die, and he talks about Lula's formidable voice. Melina realizes that her boyfriend died the same way. She tried to get some information from the fireman, but he was too clouded with love. Melina is in a rage and vows to find the mermaid and get her ready for dinner. Returning to Lula and Gaspard, the main character asks her to spend an evening at the bar, and at midnight, he would take her back to the water. He wants to show her how human beings enjoy life, and she accepts. They get ready properly. Gaspard dresses in a fancy costume, and Rosie gets a dress for Lula. They go to the bar happily with his motor tricycle. Oh, how romantic. Reaching the bar, Gaspard realized that he couldn't drive his vehicle onto the boat, so he brings a wheelchair for Lula. At the bar, the party is in full swing. Gaspard's father welcomes the two lovebirds. Everyone mistakes Lula for a disabled girl wearing a mermaid costume. The old man brings the girl a flower, and she eats it. Anyway, it's better than soap. Gaspard's father brought a kind of piñata in the form of a heart. His family tradition reveals whether a girl has a good heart. Gaspard hits the piñata, from which red rose petals come out, and this means that Lula has a good heart and he can fall in love with her. Very ironic as a thing, isn't it?
During the evening, Gaspard found out that Lula has other passions except singing. This girl would beat you at a drinking challenge without even trying. Just watch how she finishes this bottle of champagne by herself.
Lula reveals to him that she is the only survivor of her kind.
Dès que je chante, tout le monde meurt.
Her mother had been killed by a group of sailors. Since that day, Lula has been taking revenge by killing everyone who approaches her. Meanwhile, Melina had also arrived at the party. The woman does not want to forget this mermaid business. Returning to the couple, Gaspard asks one of the best questions you can ask on a date. Turns out, Lula is a vicious serial killer with 43 sailors killed. Gaspard laughs it off and says he dated 43 different women. In perfect timing, Gaspard's father played their song. After that, followed a romantic dance in a pretty magical atmosphere. In the middle of the party, Melina joined them and showed Gaspard's book to the waiter. At this exact moment, Lula and Gaspard were leaving the party. They get into the motor tricycle and wander around the city. But wasn't he supposed to get her back in the water at midnight? Whatever, Gaspard took her in front of the bright Eiffel Tower. Slowly, he falls in love with her without realizing it. That same night, he takes her to a public aquarium. Once she reaches the water, Lula was as happy as a baby taking its first steps. She begins swimming among the fish and called Gaspard to join her. He leaves his shoes and jumps into the water. After a few moments, his heart aches as it does every time he falls in love with her. Lula tried to help him breathe, but he fell unconscious. The next day, we see him raging as he drives his wreck. He is sad because he has to leave Lula, but he's promised to let her go. They reach the water of a river, and at that moment, Gaspard asks her to stay with him. He promises to take her to all the world's oceans and always be near her, even if he needs to drive into the water. Lula's not sure because it's too risky. However, it cannot be denied that there's chemistry between these unlikely lovers. Gaspard does not push too hard and decides to make one last surprise for her before letting her go. Gaspard took her home and showed her a performance invented by his mother. Lula got emotional and realized that he was falling more and more in love. They still don't have much time.
Un vrai poisson.
On one hand, she needs to get back into the seawater urgently, and he can't fall in love with her. As soon as he realizes this, he will be dead. At the show's end, Lula asked him to bring her fresh fish. Gaspard did not overthink and promised to rob a Chinese restaurant with a water gun to get her fish. Gaspard flashed out, and Rosie spotted him. Lula began to cry, and from her eyes did not flow normal tears, but pure pearls. Immediately after, Lula called Rosie and begged her to take her away. The woman didn't understand why.
Qu'est-ce que tu racontes là?
Because Gaspard had never been so happy in the last few years. Lula revealed to her that he would die if she stayed any longer. So when Gaspard returned with the fish and flowers, he found the door to Rosie's apartment open and realized that something had happened. He went into the bathroom of his house and found Melina and her assistant analyzing the bathtub. Gaspard bursts out in anger and asks where Lula is. Eventually, he has severe pain in his heart and falls unconscious. Melina and her assistant take Gaspard and Lula to the hospital. The siren's magic was beginning to have an effect on Gaspard. Lula woke up and asked for him. But Melina told her that he would die like all her other victims. Lula is sorrowful because she's in love with Gaspard, but Melina doesn't care. She's still furious about her boyfriend's death. Soon after, Rosie tricks Melina by saying that there's an emergency waiting for her. Melina walks away from Lula, and Rosie wakes Gaspard. Soon, together, they pick up Lula's rollaway bed and carry her outside. Soon, Melina realizes that she has been tricked and speeds out of the hospital. But it is too late because Gaspard has already left on his vehicle. But how could this wreck be at the hospital if Gaspard was taken in an ambulance? Melina asks Rosie where they are going, knowing that Gaspard could die at any moment. Rosie initially doesn't want to reveal this, but then lies to Melina again by saying that they're going to the river near the bar. In fact, Melina arrives at the river but finds nothing and receives a call from her assistant informing her of Gaspard's actual location. In the process, the guy stopped to fill up the tank. His health was deteriorating more and more. He also brought walkie-talkies to keep in touch with Lula on the way. We can see that he is carrying her in a tub, but I don't understand why. On the way, Lula reveals that she's in love and then drops the walkie-talkie. Gaspard hears her just fine, but he doesn't respond to her. He starts to remember the good times with her, which makes him feel bad, even though he tries to convince himself that he doesn't love her. They arrive at a seashore early in the morning, and Gaspard takes her to the water. There, they begin to kiss, a short but intense kiss. After that, he lets her go. Lula looks at him sorrowfully, knowing that he will die, and swims away. At the same time, Melina arrived. She saw Gaspard dying in the water and reached out to carry him to the shore. She checked his pulse, and a moment later, instead of seeing Gaspard, she saw her boyfriend, Victor. He pulled her hand as if he said, "Save me." Thus, Melina actually saved Gaspard's life. A few days later, Gaspard was in the bathtub at home when he received a phone call from Melina's assistant. The good man returned Lula's priceless pearls to Gaspard. After all, she poured those pearls for him, so they belonged to him. The next day, Gaspard bought his father's bar and the boat with those pearls, so he continues his life across the sea in the hope of finding Lula again.